Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a really fascinating literary journey. We're going to look at exactly how a modern author reimagines a beloved classic by exploring the maturity, the struggles, and the profound evolution of an iconic character. So, if you love literature, compelling character arcs, or honestly, just a really good story about how time changes us all, you are absolutely in the right place. Okay, let's dive right in.
It's kind of the ultimate question, isn't it? I mean, we're so used to that traditional romantic arc that ends in a grand wedding, a sealed kiss, and just the general assumption of happily ever after. But real life, as we all know, keeps going. So what actually happens to a Jane Austen heroine 22 years after the final page of her original story? Today we're exploring the source interview about a highly anticipated sequel, The Heiress of Northanger Abbey, which answers that exact question by revisiting Catherine Morland. Let's start with Section 1, a return to Northanger, reviving a Regency classic.
So this whole project actually didn't start with a solitary author just staring at a blank page. It began as a collaborative challenge. The idea originally sparked from a group project over at Muse Publications led by Chris Waldeher. It was called Once Upon a Gothic, and basically, authors were challenged to pitch a classic Gothic novel to interpret in a brand new way, like a retelling, a prequel, or a sequel. Our author chose Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey purely as a tribute to her deep devotion to Austen's work. She ultimately wrote a sequel that was initially just part of a 2025 Kickstarter campaign. But, and I love this, she loved writing it so much that she went way deeper. She added chapters, expanded the whole novel, and eventually brought it to major retailers. It's just a beautiful example of how a simple creative prompt can spread like wildfire into a full-scale literary exploration.
Moving on to Section 2, Catherine 22 years later, from naive teen to confident mother.
Think back to the original novel. Catherine, at 17, was this curious, highly excitable, and just incredibly honest young woman. But I mean, think about how much you change in 2 decades. Now, at 39, she's really embraced her responsibilities as a rector's wife, actively helping the people of Woodston. She's confident, she's an excellent mother, actually using her own mother as a role model. But the author makes a really important point here. She hasn't lost her core identity. That natural warmth, that honesty, and that vibrant energy, they are all still very much intact.
However, time doesn't exactly erase all wounds or old family dynamics. Her husband's family hasn't entirely evolved along with her. General Tilney's terrible treatment of her in the original novel still casts a pretty long shadow. The rest of the Tilneys might actually still view Catherine through the lens of the past, kind of as that innocent, maybe slightly foolish girl from the country. So she has to navigate this tricky world where she is treated with affection, sure, but also with this lingering condescension. It adds a really compelling, complicated layer of social tension to her adult life.
All right, Section 3, Mothers, Daughters, and Romantics, the generational divide of 1820.
Now, a massive cultural shift was happening at this time. The author specifically chose the year 1820 to step away from a strictly Bridgerton-like world. Jane Austen's Regency era often featured these deeply sheltered women who were navigating very strict societal rules. But jump ahead just a tiny bit to the 1820s, and you hit the era of the early Romantics. We're talking about free-spirited radicals here. Think about Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein in 1816, or poets like Byron and Coleridge. This was a time when intelligent, well-educated young women, just like Catherine's daughter Phoebe, would be deeply, deeply inspired by these intense passions and entirely new ways of thinking.
Which naturally leads directly to some very real motherly worries. Catherine looks at her daughter, Phoebe, who is just so eager to follow her own passions in life, and she feels this universally relatable, timeless anxiety. Catherine desperately wants her daughter to have the happiest life possible, for sure, but she also knows how society works. She fears the cost of her daughter picking this unusual, highly passionate, and potentially dangerous path. It's that classic tension, right? Wanting your child to fly, but being absolutely terrified of them falling.
And that brings us to Section 4, Dialing Up the Gothic, Charting the Tension.
I absolutely love this insight from the source interview. The author literally says, I actually used an outline and charted a careful progression of Gothic moments. It goes up and up and up. So it wasn't just, randomly throwing in a spooky manor or a loud thunderstorm for effect. It was a highly calculated balancing act. The whole goal was to introduce this eerie atmosphere without totally overpowering the witty society dynamics that we all expect from an Austen-inspired world.
Let's actually map out exactly how that progression works. In step 1, the author starts us off in Bath. Now, it's not a haunted house, but rather subtle Gothic undertones at a society ball. It creates this atmosphere of people who are physically unwell but just desperately plunging themselves into entertainment. Then, in step 2, we move to Woodston. Here, the tension visibly rises with the rural Gothic possibilities. You've got a St. Joseph's Eve bonfire, a dark forest at night, and some seriously eerie predictions from a local cunning woman. Finally, step 3 brings us to Dartmoor in the second half of the novel. And here, the author admits she turns the Gothic dial up several notches and just keeps it there. It's really a masterclass in pacing. She's slowly boiling the water before the characters even realize it's getting hot.
Which leads us to section 5, Finding Her True Grit, the Power of Maternal Love.
A completely crucial part of Catherine's internal growth is her newfound maturity. If you remember the original Northanger Abbey, a massive part of Catherine's arc was her inability to separate the terrifying Gothic novels she was reading from her actual everyday reality. She imagined horrors where there literally were none. But now, armed with maturity and a whole lot of common sense, she is simply no longer that naive girl. When actual danger and actual mystery present themselves in the sequel, she processes them through the lens of a grounded, highly intelligent adult.
And that really grounds us in our defining trait for the sequel, true grit. Because Catherine loves her family with every bit of her heart and soul, she flat out refuses to let anyone hurt her daughter, Phoebe. It is this fierce, protective, maternal determination that gives her the courage to overcome the escalating Gothic fears the author has so meticulously charted out. A mother's love, it turns out, is the ultimate weapon against the dark. As we kind of wrap up the author's vision here, this quote really hits the nail on the head regarding the core intention behind the book. The author wants us to celebrate Catherine's journey. She isn't just a static character frozen back in the Regency era. She has a distinct, powerful arc. She overcomes very real obstacles. She faces genuine suspense, and above all, she learns to truly believe in herself as a woman, as a wife, and as a mother. The whole thing is designed to leave the reader with a profound, warm feeling of satisfaction.
So, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder today. Seeing how beautifully 22 years shaped Catherine Morland, ask yourself, how might life, family, and the passage of time completely reshape the fears and strengths of your own favorite fictional heroes? If you picked up their story 2 whole decades after their happy ending, who would they be? It's a pretty fascinating lens through which to view the characters we all love. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.